So, firstly, I'd like to say thanks to all of you for making time to join us today. We have many people who registered for today's webinar, and I hope that you remember to register for the webinars that follow. Very quickly, my name is Anushka Soma Patel. I'm the co-MD for Girls in Tech South Africa. Girls in Tech South Africa was founded in 2019, but Girls in Tech globally was founded in 2007. And our mission is to close the gender gap in tech. We currently a global NGO. We have about 50 chapters around the world, and in those 50 chapters, we have more than 60,000 members. So thanks for joining us, and thanks for being amongst the 60,000 that are going to help us close this gender gap that we deal with globally. But more importantly, thanks for joining us because we are here to learn something really amazing today. A little backdrop in terms of the series of masterclasses that we're having. So we've called this the Web3 Masterclass series. And the reason we call it the Web3 Masterclass series is because I started my journey in blockchain in about 2017, 2018. And as I embarked on this journey, there was so much to learn. It's such a steep learning curve. And it wasn't easy because you had to be really curious to learn a lot. But over the last few years, I found that the tech has matured and the tech has evolved to quite an extent where there are many people setting up new business models, setting up their own little businesses, and really making headway and progress, both in terms of maturing the tech, but also in terms of creating their own new business models, and finding ways to apply this technology at the very early stages that could really set them up for success later on as well. And the one question that came to mind in August this year was, how do we get this ball rolling faster in South Africa? And so, while I was at Consensus, I met this lady, Sonia, who you will get to meet during this masterclass series. And she said, Anushka, why don't we teach your Girls in Tech members how to create their own NFT collections? I was like, yes, let's do it. So here we were having a chat at like 2 o'clock in the morning, South African time, because that was like a good time for her to chat. And And I said to her, okay, but can people just come in cold or do they need to have some knowledge about like what is blockchain, what is cryptocurrencies, what is a smart contract, what is NFTs, and all this jargon that we speak about? And we realized that people do need a bit of a foundational knowledge of what we're dealing with so that when you thrown into the workshop of how to create your own NFT collection, you have a base level of knowledge. And we will also equip you with another workshop that will give you some ideas in terms of how to stay safe in a Web3 world and how to like look after your Web3 possessions or your blockchain possessions. So, without any further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Tanya Knowles. Tanya, thanks so much for agreeing to do these workshops for us. So, Tanya's been in blockchain since 2015. She's held many different roles in various organizations. And her focus today is mostly business application of blockchain tech. So, we have the absolute right person in the room to help us get an intro to blockchain today, so that we can start building on this foundation to get to creating our own NFT collections eventually. So over to you, Tanya.
Thanks, Anushka. Thanks so much for the intro. Welcome, everyone. So, a few little things from my side. As Anushka's alluded to, this is intended to be a series of talks. So, what I'm going to cover tonight is a lot of blockchain just 101. So, for those that have sort of a base level understanding, please just bear with me on that. But over the next few weeks, we will be building up until eventually we have that NFT collection that Anushka is talking about, but we're starting at the ground level tonight. You'll also perhaps hear from our voice that it's a little bit croaky at the moment, so I'm hoping I'm going to get through the talk, but please forgive me if my voice starts to go halfway through, and I hope if you can all hear me and I get through the whole thing. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly share a presentation. So give me one sec. Okay. Right. Okay, great. So just a brief intro. At the moment, my day job, I work for a company called Adara. So we're using blockchain technology to essentially solve some pain points in the banking industry right now. They focus mainly on treasury and payments. And the project that I'm working on for those people who are in financial services, we've seen how digital assets can be used to be pledged as collateral with something like a clearinghouse. And the use of blockchain technology and a shared ledger around that. Our biggest client is a banking consortium called Finality International. It's made up of about 16 banks, along with NASDAQ, 𝒊𝒏𝒄𝒍𝒖𝒂𝒍, a few of the other big financial institutions. And we're really excited because we're working on a project with them, which is going to go live with the Bank of England now in October. So when people say that blockchain is still in the theory space, this is really now coming to the fore with this project going live with the BOE. So it's a very, very exciting one. I think it's actually, I think kudos to Finality. We're the tech partners to them, but I think it's one of the first blockchain projects that's actually going live with a connection to a central bank and a regulator being the Bank of England. So it's definitely at a point now where it's becoming real. And then you'll just see from that verbiage there that I'm also the chair of the South African Financial Blockchain Consortium. I'm involved with Singularity University and the Global Blockchain Business Council. Right, so firing off, you know what, I've been covering this for a while, but it always just fascinates me that technology, there was an economist called Carlota Perez, and she always has a theory around how technology arrives in waves. And she says that roughly every 40 to 50 years, a new wave of technology comes along. And the last time we saw this sort of thing happen was in 1971, which was the birth of the information age and telecommunications, which ultimately resulted in the internet. And she said that right now the world is ripe for the next big technology disruption. And the question on many people's lips is, could that potentially be cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology? And and as an advocate of this, I'm obviously very pro that this is the potential next phase of technology to come around. And the interesting part about these cycles is they seem to follow the same approach. So you have this eruption where the technology first bursts onto the scene. There's this absolute frenzy. It's like, the gold rush in South Africa, just over 100 years ago. And then there seems to be a crash, and then the regulators step in, and then you go through something called the golden age, and eventually the technology matures. So if you've been following cryptocurrencies for a while, you'll probably think that we are in the crash stage at the moment, and we've been through a few crashes. So 2017 was a big one. We've had another big one earlier this year. But you will, if you follow this space, you'll see that the regulators are definitely stepping in to say, now is the time that we need to be doing something here, because this industry in some ways has got out of control, if I can put it that way. That the lack of regulation has caused a huge number of scams to come out of the industry, and the regulators are now definitely clamping down on those where people have lost money as a result. So I think what's fascinating about this is that we are at a point where we're reinventing money. And before getting into this space, I never really thought about this. But the concept, if you look at the concept of money, it actually is evolving all the time. So hundreds of years ago, there was things like cattle, and it's still used today as a form of money. At one stage, even salt was used as a form of money because you could preserve things with it. We then moved eventually onto banknotes and coins, and we've moved into a digital age now with cell phones where we are able to store money on our phones. And the next big wave that we've seen is this concept of cryptocurrencies and digital currencies that are coming to the fore. Now, tonight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk specifically around what blockchain is about. But I think it's important, I'm going to very briefly, in my next talk, which is in 2 weeks' time, I'm going to cover more about what cryptocurrencies are about. But I think it's very important that we just understand what has made blockchain so famous. And it actually would be cryptocurrencies. And for me, the biggest gift that Bitcoin as a cryptocurrency has given the world is it's allowed us to reimagine how money works. So I've touched on that briefly. But up until recently, we had no way to transfer value between two people unless you were physically in front of them. So if I had a 10 Rand note and I had to give it to somebody else, I could physically give it to them. Or you had to rely on a trusted party to move that value for you. So it could be a bank, it could be a taxi driver taking money to your cousin. These days we're even using Uber drivers to move things around for us. So you always had to rely on a trusted party to move anything of value for you. And then in 2009, under the pseudonym of Satoshi Nakamoto, the Bitcoin white paper was written. And for the first time, this concept of moving value over the internet without a trusted party came about. And essentially what Bitcoin did is it developed a computer algorithm that allowed us to stop copying something digitally. So if I have a photo of myself and I now send it to Anushka, that means that she also has the same photo of me. Now, you obviously can't do that with money. If I have 10 Rand and I send a picture of the 10 Rand to somebody else, now we both have 10 Rand, it essentially becomes worthless. But for the first time under Bitcoin, we were able to send something over the internet digitally, and it could still remain unique and it could still retain its value. And the underlying technology that underpinned this whole Bitcoin concept was blockchain technology. And yes, Bitcoin is very, very well known and very famous. But what happened at the time is there was this explosion to say, hang on a second, this technology is allowing us essentially to disrupt industries that have been around for many, many years, like banks, like a deeds office for houses, like I'll get into some examples of them. It's allowing us to disrupt them and say, do we actually really need these parties anymore? We now have a technology where we can move value over the internet without these people being involved. So we've always said that this was the missing piece of the internet. Up until now, we've been able to send text and sound and video images and things like that, but we've never been able to actually send value over the internet. And blockchain is the missing piece of that puzzle. So our world today, we rely on these intermediaries all the time. If you want to get married, you've got someone, let's say at Home Affairs or something that a marriage officer, that's the word I'm looking for. You would have a marriage officer that would sign that marriage contract. If you want to buy a house, we've got a deeds registry that's keeping the central record of who owns what houses in South Africa. You've even got something like the iTunes store or Spotify saying, okay, these are the people that own this following music. The thing is, we rely on these parties to essentially be a trusted independent party. So they are keeping control. They're the legal record of these things. They levy a service for what they're offering. But the challenge is that they become a single point of failure. So we're fortunate in a country like South Africa, for example, that our deeds office is relatively secure. But you will find that potentially in other countries, there have been cases where deeds officers have become so corrupt that people have actually lost the proof that they are the legal owner of a house. Or you might have a bank going under, or any type of corruption or failures that happen. So people have started to say, if this technology has come along, do we actually still need these parties involved?
Yes.
So we may ask ourselves, well, what's the big deal? I don't think we realize how many of these trusted parties we're actually using all the time. I've mentioned some examples. It could be a bank, it could be a deeds registry, it could be a Department of Home Affairs. We even trust Facebook with things like our photos or a government office or iTunes. But the question is to say, how can we actually use this technology to perhaps disrupt some of these industries? And there's been some very, very exciting projects that people have been coming out with in this space. So here's just some examples of people saying, well, why do I need a marriage officer to say that I'm married? Why don't I record that in technology? Or why isn't there a way that I can keep my own medical records instead of handing them over to a medical provider when they actually are my personal information? And there's many things. Anushka would be able to give you some more details on digital identity to say that, this is private information to me. Why are we trusting it, or why are we giving that information away all the time to a trusted third party that can be hacked? You'll know that even this year, not to pick on any organization, TransUnion, which is one of the biggest credit bureaus in South Africa, was hacked earlier this year, and millions of people's data was stolen from them. So people are saying, how can I keep control of what I have but still actually have the benefits of using this technology to move things more simply and quickly and things like that. Because what's happened is that all these types of things have essentially become assets, but in their digital form. So the blockchain, everyone at one stage thought that there would be the blockchain and there would just be one of them. There's now many of them. It really allows us to move things in a peer-to-peer manner. I say no legal hassles. You know what? I still want to give credit to the lawyers. Everybody thought that the blockchain would come along and disrupt lawyers completely, that we would just be able to sell our houses and you know, move the deed from one person to the other. But the lawyers are still involved. But I think there's far less legal hassles, because this concept around having a smart contract can maybe automate some of the processes that we do have manually at the moment where lawyers are involved. There's supposed to be no intermediary. The blockchain allows you to have this immutable record. So it's a record that nobody can ever tamper with. It's supposed to be relatively economical, so free or cheap. And it's supposed to be extremely quickly. And, you know, just touching on this, I think the speed at which things happen on the blockchain is really remarkable, because right now, very often, if you want to move money from one side of the world to the other, it can take anything from 3 to 5 days for a remittance to happen. Whereas in reality, it's just a digital record. So it should be able to move as fast as somebody sending an email. And one of the benefits of the blockchain is supposed to be the speed at which it can move these digital assets around the world. So I just want to pick up on some key phrases in this space. The first thing is that a blockchain is around having an ecosystem. Okay, so that's the first part. And then people have digital assets. They might be something like they call it a tokenization process. So they can tokenize an asset. It's sitting there as a shared ledger. So what happens right now is you've got this network of computers. So maybe I didn't explain this earlier, but essentially what the blockchain does is it's a network of computers that is keeping this record of who owns what up to date all the time. And the algorithm that is running in the background is keeping that information up to date to make sure that this concept of having two digital assets never happens. So it's this single shared ledger. There's no central authority, theoretically. So, you know, Bitcoin is always an amazing example of this, that there's no single entity actually controlling it. And the other big benefit is that it is immutable. So once a transaction goes into that blockchain, it cannot be undone. And that, in theory, makes it more, well, that does make it sort of not open to corruption, that somebody can go in there and actually alter the records that are sitting in there. All right, so just going one level just deeper, as I said, we've got peer-to-peer transacting, we've got no central authority, there's blocks of data. People ask, why is it called a blockchain? So you've got blocks of data that are being chained together. I always use the analogy to say it's very much like an Excel spreadsheet where you add in a new tab onto the bottom all the time. So every 10 minutes, for example, all the transactions that have been happened in the last 10 minutes would be put into a new sheet. And those sheets are linked together, and that's why they're called a block. So they put into a new block, and those blocks are linked together. So that's why it's called the blockchain, because they chain together. It's running very, very advanced cryptography to keep this entire database up to date. So if you've ever heard that, you know, Bitcoin's been hacked, I'd like to say that the Bitcoin blockchain to date has actually never, ever been hacked. What's actually happened, which proves how secure it is, by the way, because people have literally been trying to hack it for 12, 13 years now. What's actually happened, if you ever hear that Bitcoins have been stolen, it means that an exchange, like a market where people have gone to buy them, very often that is what has been hacked. But the Bitcoin blockchain to this date has still never been hacked. And it's very, very secure. What's actually happening is that there's people competing, and you'll see there I've got the word miners. There's people competing all the time to solve this algorithm. And that competition, it means they're putting more and more computing power towards keeping that network safe. And the more computer power that goes into it, the more competition there is, the more complex it becomes, and then the safer it is and the more difficult it is to hack, if that makes sense. So in very, very simplistic terms. It also allows for instantaneous settlement. So that means that if somebody is wanting to a transaction, so the second that I receive my Bitcoin, the same second the person who I've bought them from would receive their money. So there's instantaneous settlement. And then we do get this concept of both public and private blockchains. So I'm going to dive a little bit into that just now. But essentially what happened is that a public blockchain would be something like the Bitcoin blockchain, whereas a lot of private groups or consortiums, they looked at this and they thought, hang on a second, this technology really has potential, but we don't want it to be open to the whole world to try and hack and see. Let's rather come up with a more private version of it and do something internally ourselves. So, for example, the project that I mentioned at the beginning that I'm working on with so just to put this in perspective for those people who are interested in the technology, the blockchain is really sitting as the underlying technology there. And then on top of that, you've got a protocol. So that would be the type of technology that's been used. And then people go and add a token level on top of that. So that's Bitcoin, Ether, all the different digital assets that you hear about. And then people have wallets that they use. So wallet is really, you can call it an account. And then on top of that, they go and build applications on top of that of how can we use these types of things. I will get into some examples of different types of applications that people can use, but we can also chat about that a bit more at the end. So I think one of the amazing things is that, people always say, oh, this is a solution looking for a problem. And, there's all sorts of negativity around it. But for me, one of the fascinating parts is that the biggest and most advanced companies in the world are investing in blockchain technology in some manner or form. And what I like to say is to anybody who's involved in a company or in IT or anything like that, you should really be looking and saying, how can my company get involved? What industry projects are taking place that blockchain is being used right now? Because this really does have the potential to disrupt a lot of traditional industries too. And this is always a great one to say how quickly this can happen. Just over 15 years ago, the stock exchange was dominated by the oil barons. And in under 15 years, I always say that the whiz kids of Silicon Valley have essentially taken over. And something like Bitcoin has already been around for 10 years. And for me, it's just a matter of time until these types of blockchain applications really do become massive and start to disrupt this industry. And there on that bottom line, where you look at the likes of Apple and Microsoft and Amazon and the FANGs as they call them, most of these companies are looking at some sort of crypto asset technology or blockchain technology in some way, just to try and keep up with the trends that are happening. I love this quote from Anthony Pompilano. It says, "Bankers live in Excel, engineers live in GitHub. The one speaks the language of the past, the other of the future." And for me, it really resonates with me that our world is shifting from the traditional world of bankers and Excels into this tech IT world that we live in now. So some applications around how this is being used. There's various things around digital currencies, record keeping, securities, and smart contracts. Maybe what I'll do is I'll try and just give an example within each bucket there. So if we look at digital currencies, this concept of having a central bank digital currency, even like something like issuing, like for the central bank, like the 𝒊𝒏, the South African Reserve Bank, to issue the rand as a digital currency. We don't have that at the moment. What we have at the moment is just our banks are holding a digital record of the money that we are keeping with them. But that money is actually a liability on our banks. It's not actually money that's been issued by the South African government, which is another whole talk that we can do. But the point is that many central banks around the world are saying, how can we issue a digital currency directly to our people as such, to people. The other one is record keeping. So things like voting, title deeds I've spoken about for houses, healthcare, to say, can we have this central shared ledger of information around people's healthcare records instead of it sitting with one party? Let me give you a really practical example here. Right now, if you're not well, you have to go to a doctor and they run a series of blood tests. Then the next minute you need to go and see a specialist, and then the specialist doesn't have access to those blood tests anymore. And they go and half the time go and run the same tests, or now they need to contact the lab and get those tests from you. And then you need to go to radiology for something else, etc., etc. And the idea here is that could you not use blockchain technology to have a shared database of health records where everybody who has a right to access those records, and they would actually be your private records, by the way. So that leads into the digital identity debate. But your private records would be sitting on a blockchain where you would be able to grant access to a doctor or to radiology or to your medical aid or whatever, those sort of records, instead of having these duplications of information sitting all over the place. Securities, so security is any sort of equity, bond, money market instrument, any like shares that are traded on the JSE. There are hundreds of applications at the moment that people are looking at to say, how can we tokenize these securities, and move them in a more efficient, secure, and faster manner and cheaper manner than what we're doing today. It almost goes back to, why does it take so long to move some of these assets around? And then smart contracts. Let me give you a great example of a smart contract. So this is on, it links into all of these, but there's a project in France called Project Alouette. And what they did was they decided to tokenize currency. So they decided during COVID that they would give everybody 900 euros as a helicopter drop of money. So the Project Alouette means helicopter in French, okay? Or it's a type of helicopter in French. My French isn't great. And what they did is they said to citizens, okay, you can download a digital wallet onto your phone, and we will give everybody 900 euros with the idea that they wanted to stimulate the economy. But what governments have actually found in the past is that when they do these drops of money, it actually doesn't really have the desired effect. Some people just go and save the money. They don't spend it. Some people gamble it away. Some people go and buy an expensive handbag or get drunk or do whatever they want to do. But it doesn't actually have the desired effect of increasing GDP and stimulating the economy in the way they wanted. So with Project Alouette, they said, okay, let's tokenize the euro, and we will program a smart contract to get that money to behave in a certain way. So what happened was, if you hadn't spent the money after a month, it was only worth 75% of its original value. If you hadn't spent it after 2 months, it was only worth 50% of its original value. And then they gave all sorts of incentives to people to say, spend this money at the following shops to buy food and clothing, which are essentials. If you don't need that money, you could donate it on that wallet to a charity. And then they said to the retailers, if you accept this type of digital cash or these tokens, we will then incentivize you that you can pay your taxes, use it for PAYE and VAT and things like that. So by programming money and using smart contracts, they could actually impact people's behavior, and they could impact the way the money worked, and it went and had a much more significant positive effect on GDP in the countries that went ahead with this type of idea. So that's just a good example of how you can program money on the blockchain using smart contracts and get it to behave in a certain way. Okay, so I always say that this industry is split into two, and I've briefly mentioned it. So there's a whole bunch of people that are reimagining the world. They're saying, how can we really get rid of banks, get rid of the rand, only have cryptocurrencies, it's this, they're reimagining this whole new space. And then there's some people who are saying, how can we use blockchain technology to really try and improve the way we do things at the moment? So the first one speaks to these permissioned blockchain projects. So those are the people on the right-hand side of that diagram, that's the existing world is there. And they're saying, how can we use it to improve it? And these are some examples. So unfortunately, well, maybe I shouldn't give you the bad news first, but okay, let me give you the bad news first. So this B3R was actually the insurance industry that got together and said, how can we use this instead of us having duplicates of information and insurance policies and, all sorts of stuff? Why don't we collaborate and we put all this information onto a blockchain and we can share it, and it will be far more faster, more economical, etc., etc. This project was probably launched about 3 or 4 years ago, and I just heard this week that it's been shut down. But these things are these. I think there's been a lot of hype in the blockchain space. But as I say, there's projects that are going, like any startup, there's going to be projects that are going to work and projects that are not going to work. The other one I've spoken about is Finality. They're the ones going live with the Bank of England in October, so that one's working very well. There's also these consortiums, for example, around the gas and oil industry. So let me think of an example on how to use this. So the one was to say, if you want to import a car from China to South Africa, there's something like 360 pages of documentation to do something like that. And a lot of that information is just a duplicate of other information. You know, what's the VIN number, what's the make, the color, of the car. And everybody in that supply chain process is duplicating the same information over and over again as you bring the car in from, the car manufacturer to the shipping company to customs to, the person who's going to transport it to the dealership. And the idea is for industries to collaborate together and say, hang on a second, why don't we put all this information into these digital records on the blockchain, and we can collaborate instead of duplicating the information. And then the South African Financial Blockchain Consortium, they've looked at various projects before around the concepts of digital identity. Project 𝒂𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒍 is also something that the South African Reserve Bank have run to say, how can we use blockchain technology, most recently for debenture, to settle debentures. So there's many, many examples of these permissioned blockchain projects that are taking off. And then in the unpermissioned decentralized world, over and above Bitcoin, there's many exciting projects. So these are these new asset classes, or this peer-to-peer ecosystem. So Filecoin is an example of, if you've got some spare space on your hard drive, you can rent it out as file storage, and anybody who uses that storage would be paying you in a Filecoin. The other great example I love, which is the BAT one, that's that triangle one there. So that's called the basic attention token. And essentially what it's saying is that right now, Google and Amazon, I think it's Google, Amazon, and Facebook, I think they generate over 80% of the revenue that they get is from advertising. And the advertiser is paying them for the advert, as opposed to paying the publisher. So the idea here is to say, let's have an internet where if you want to advertise on the internet, actually the person that has put up the advert is the one, if somebody clicks on it, for example, they're the ones who will be getting the revenue from that advert. It doesn't go to that third party anymore to be paying the likes of Facebook and Google and that. So these are some examples of the peer-to-peer economy where you all have an equal relationship in the way things are working, and everybody's incentivized to make that whole ecosystem work. All right, so love it or hate it, because I know there's many naysayers out there, especially around Bitcoin. I always say that if nothing else, this technology has got people to ask questions. It's got people to say, that example I used, why does it take so long to send money across the world if it's just a digital record? Why do these credit bureaus have access to all my information? Why is Amazon and Facebook generating all this advertising revenue when I'm paying so much for it when it could just be coming to me as a consumer? A good example there is, let's say if you write a blog article and that blog article gets a lot of views, you don't get the revenue from that, but you will find that the publisher is the one getting all the revenue from that. So this technology is really opened up to say, is there a new, different way we could be doing things around the world? And the other one I say is it's woken up the sleeping giants. So for many years, and I'm picking on the bankers, for many years, the banking industry has been talking about projects that they wanted to get off the ground. It could be letters of credit, proxy voting, making payments faster. And they slowly, I think that a lot of those conversations were put on the back burner for a long time, particularly during the financial crisis. I think that banks were really hit with a tsunami of regulation during the financial crisis, and a lot of them stopped innovating. But what happened with Bitcoin and blockchain is it's put a number of those conversations back on the table. So I think I've got a slide on it here. No, not yet. Okay, I took it out. But let me touch on. So as I say, these making payments faster. Swift has recently done a project called GPI to try and move money around the world. And I really think that we wouldn't have seen the impetus around some of these projects had Bitcoin and blockchain not come along and really said to a lot of incumbent industries, guys, you need to wake up. This world is moving very, very quickly. And these things that you've been wanting to do for a long time, you now need to take action and do it. So here again are some examples that are in the blockchain space. Many of these companies have been around for a long time and are trying to reinvent themselves using blockchain technology in a different manner or form. This is Project Alouette. So this was my intro to that. So I've told you a bit about that. And then for me, one of the fascinating things has been, or one of the things that really has given the world a lot of impetus around this, is that Facebook themselves, a while ago, it was probably about 3 years ago now, they announced that they were going to issue their own cryptocurrency. So this was going to be a basket of assets. It was made up of pounds and dollars and euros and that. And they were saying that they were going to issue a currency on the Facebook platform that people would essentially be able to move around the world. And if you think about it, that's quite a scary thought, because Facebook, between the various platforms that they own, between WhatsApp and Facebook and is it Instagram they own, I think it's the other one, they have access to about 2.5 billion people. That's a third of the world's population. And the payments industry right now is a $1.9 trillion industry. And here you're essentially having a social media company coming along and saying, I'm going to issue my own currency and disrupt that industry. And by them doing that, they had the option of becoming the biggest central bank in the world, which is quite a scary thought that somebody like a social media company could become such a large central bank. At the time when they launched, these were the companies involved. You'll see big names like Visa and Mastercard there. But what happened is it made the regulators very, very nervous. They said to themselves, hang on a second, we cannot have an organization like Facebook now essentially competing with central banks or competing with banks. And how is this whole thing going to work? And at the time, the regulators wrote some very sternly worded letters to some of these companies and said, we're not happy with you being involved in this project. And as a result, most of them withdrew because of the regulators. And the regulators, at the time I was quite critical of it, but at the end of the day, they're there to protect people. And then Facebook announced late last year that they were actually shutting the project down. But for me, it just shows the power that this technology has, that it could set the cat amongst the pigeons in such a big way. For those wanting to get involved in the space, when people get involved, they always say, blockchain and crypto and Bitcoin, it's amazing. It's not regulated. It's a decentralized. No one can stop you, etc. But the power of the law is very strong. And at the end of the day, regulators are catching up where they're coming into the space to draft regulation. And if you think about it, the regulation is there to protect people. There's an old colleague I have in the space, 𝒕𝒓𝒂𝒏𝒔𝒊𝒏𝒈, who runs 𝒊𝒏𝒄𝒍𝒖𝒂𝒍, one of the big South African exchanges. And he always says that laws exist for a reason. We have rules on the road to protect all of us and to protect our lives while we're driving. And if you look at the origins of most laws, that's why they actually exist. And for me, this space has received a lot of negative publicity, particularly over the last year, because of all the scams and because it was unregulated. And anybody who's trying to do something that's not regulated, I really caution you against it, to say, you know what, the laws are there for a reason. And 5-6 years ago, I was a complete maverick. I was like, oh no, we don't need the laws. The technology can do everything. Blockchain's going to change the world. Who needs banks? I was very much like that. But unfortunately, the business model that is associated with the technology allows a lot of scammers to come in. It doesn't give protection to people. And the law is actually there from what I believe now is actually a very, very good point to protect people in this space. So that's just my brief intro, and I know there's a few questions, so I'm going to switch over. And so please, if you've got any questions, just feel free to put them in the chat. And there were some questions sent through before that we can also have a run through.
So much, Tanya. That was a lot of information to take in. But I hope that it helped people understand what this technology is, why we think it's going to be so revolutionary. And I also hope that it helped people see that this technology is definitely becoming more mainstream. The tech exists, people are starting to play with it, people are starting to use it. So thanks so much for that overview. Would you like to go through this? Are there any questions on the line? You're welcome to put your hands up and ask if you have any questions. Otherwise, we will go straight to our list of questions that people asked. And I think the first one is, I'd just like to answer a couple, right? So the one is this field for men or women? And I'd like to say that tech is for everyone. And this is what we're trying to promote as Girls in Tech. It's not just for males. So please, bring males, bring females to the party, and let's see how we can learn and move forward. Please don't feel like limited in terms of participating. The second one is, are we getting a certificate for attending this? We unfortunately did not think about handing out certificates. However, for our NFT cause, we may hand out NFTs so that you get experience in terms of giving, sending and receiving NFTs. So, no, not necessarily certificates. And will there be more advanced content after this? Yes, there will. We will be arranging a few workshops after this. The other questions are all for Tanya to cover. The first one is, how can this tech be integrated in the traditional banking structure with all of the red tape? Tanya, you touched a little bit on it. I don't know if you want to say a little bit more.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Anushka. I think that there's various use cases around how the technology can be used. So what we're finding is, there's paths here that banks are taking. So the one is that there's this collaboration that banks are using to say, okay, can we tokenize currencies to try and move money around the world more efficiently, cross-border payments, liquidity, collateral management, things like that. And then also internally within banks. So there's an option to say, can we actually tokenize some of the assets that we have ourselves within a bank between subsidiaries or nostro accounts or things like that, or even in a regional perspective. And as a bank, can I actually go and tokenize my own commercial bank money and move that more efficiently? So yeah, I think that there's many things. And then at the same time, from a bank's perspective, you will see that many of the banks are now even getting into cryptocurrencies. So they're starting to offer wallets to their clients. They're starting to offer digital custody to their clients of these assets. So that's more from an external facing point of view. And then even from an investment point of view, just bear with me on this one. I know that all the pension funds and everybody freaks out about the idea of investing in cryptocurrencies and saying it's irresponsible to take pension money and invest it in a cryptocurrency given the volatility of it. So yes, but I do feel that there is a place within those pension portfolios to be spending a small amount on cryptocurrencies. So yeah, so those are various applications in financial services.
Thanks, Tanya. What are some of the skills needed for a beginner in the blockchain industry?
Okay, so the first thing is there's a few aspects to tackle this. The first thing is you have to read, and there are so many YouTube videos, and there's a lot of stuff, and this space is changing so quickly. I can barely keep up. So, when I first started, it was just about Bitcoin, and then Ethereum came along, and then I think we went through the ICO phase next. That's initial coin offerings, and then we went through DeFi, and then we went through. Oh, there's been so many. Now at the moment, we're in the metaverse and Web3. This is the latest one. We've been through digital identity. We've been through so many crazes. So it's very, very difficult to keep up with all of this. And the key thing is that people need to read. And then, it depends on what your preference is. So if you wanted to get involved in this space and you are a technical person, there are literally, I think, hundreds of thousands of technical jobs out there right now for looking for programmers, anything from DevOps to front end to things like that. If you're not a technical person, there are a number of opportunities. The beauty about this space is that it never sleeps. The blockchain is going all day, every day, and we find that that the industry works in the same way. It's sort of operating 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. People are more than happy to employ people who are on different time zones across the world. And there are if people want some recommendations, but there are thousands of startups in this space that are employing people at the moment. And it could be anything from becoming a community manager, of trying to get an ecosystem up and running around some sort of blockchain project. So that's more like on the social media side. Or it could be something, as I say, on the DevOps side. There's demand for legal skills. There's demand for all sorts of skills. So, I can always put some big names into the chats, but it's probably best, to look for a list of blockchain, Web3, crypto companies, and literally just go onto their career pages and see what options are available. But it really is this. I think that there's something for everybody.
Absolutely, Tanya. And I recently joined Input Output, and for the first time, I actually got involved in an actual blockchain ecosystem and community. And it's really fascinating to see how these communities are formed and how decentralized governance works and how they fund innovation projects. Um, it's absolutely fascinating to be just a fly on the wall, observing. And actually, today, I think at 7 o'clock, one of those meetings are happening. If you want the link, just message me in the chat and I'll look for the link and send that to you. Just so you can see how it works. And, by speaking to people, you'll network and you'll find opportunities as well. How do I become an active participant in future blockchain and Web3 initiatives? Be curious, go and find those networks and get involved. There are a few, for the initiatives that Girls in Tech will run. We normally email our member base and we advertise on LinkedIn and Facebook. Um, if you'd like to raise your hand and just expand on your question, we might be able to help you further. But you can also connect with us on LinkedIn and we'll gladly answer your questions. Best tools to use for NFT creation. I think we'll keep that question for the NFT session, because I know Sonia is keen to share some of that information with us. How old does a scholar need to be to get into this? What's the legal question, Tanya? I mean, answer.
I think you can be any age, I think you can even start off at a volunteering level, when you're still a student. So I know that there's organizations. I used to work for Binance at one stage. They're the one of the biggest crypto exchanges in the world. They used to have a lot of volunteers who were community development people, or I think they call Binance angels. Actually, that's the right word. And it's essentially just volunteers of people who are going out and spreading the word around. What cryptocurrencies are about, what Binance is about, going into university. So for me, there's no age limit. And then I know somebody else who's 63 years old who's working in this space very actively. I won't mention her name, just in case you all know who she is. But yes, you can be any age to be working here.
Cool. Um, and then we've got how blockchain can be used in simple phones for rural communities.
Yeah, I think this is a very challenging question. And Anushka, I think we also sometimes need a reality check. So being, people say, oh, blockchain is there to bank the unbanked and to, there's a lot of hype and promises and that. Yes, that's all true. But at the end of the day, people need a connection to the internet to make this happen. And you do most often than not need a smartphone. There are a few things that you can do with an SMS USSD string, but essentially people do need access to the internet, and they do need a smartphone to download a proper crypto wallet onto their phones, etc. So it is one of the challenges in the space. I think where it can help a lot of people is that the idea around Bitcoin is that essentially there are lower barriers to entry to get a Bitcoin wallet than you do to get a bank account. And if you are, let's say, somebody who is sitting in, America and you want to send money home to somebody in the Philippines, you would both be able to send that transaction via Bitcoin in a far faster, simpler, cheaper way than you would had the person had to have a formal bank account. So there's huge opportunities there, but at the end of the day, I'm not aware of anything where something is not relying on the internet or having a smartphone to start with. Oh, you're on mute still. Sorry.
Sorry, there has been some work done in the space, and I think in particular with respect to self-sovereign identity, Lohan Spitz has spoken around this, and there are conversations about how can you enable it. So if you have phones that can use WhatsApp, they do talk about, being able to send verifiable credentials via WhatsApp or via any medium. So I think it depends on the use case. I've also come across people that have created cards like bank cards that actually store like whole blockchains on it. That's your private blockchain. And I mean, these people were talking about concepts that were beyond what I could really interpret and understand at some point. But there are people working on these solutions. If you have a very specific question, you're welcome to just ping me on LinkedIn, and then we can see how we can connect you with people that have more answers. Um, our next question is, what are some of the challenges arising from implementing blockchain in the industry? But I don't know which industry. I guess in industry
You
in
mean,
general, what are
yeah.
some of the challenges?
I think it is very, very challenging. And, especially when you're trying to change an existing industry or integrate with an existing industry. You know, I spoke during my talk about the example of healthcare records, and it sounds amazing. But there's been many blockchain startups who have had that idea and wanted to run with it. But the reality is if you wanted to do that, you would have to convince every hospital to change their IT system. Every, lab like, Ampath or whatever you use, or Lancet, every doctor. So I think that the ideas, the a lot of these ideas work in theory, but the practical implementation, unless you're starting at an absolute ground level and starting to build something from scratch, they can be very, very challenging, especially where you have to integrate with legacy systems that exist. And then I also find that it's a very, very competitive space. So people are always trying to think of new ideas around how they can, make payments faster. But there's another 1,000 startups doing the same thing. And you'll find at the end of the day that everybody sort of hits a wall where you need to integrate with a bank or with Swift or get people on board and build a community. The thing is, blockchain relies on a community involvement, and it relies on technology, and those things can be very, very difficult to implement.
Hmm. And I also see in the chat, Leandri mentions Yoma, and I know Lohan Spies has been working with Yoma, so you can have a look at the Yoma website. And this is where they've been able to get people from different parts of the world to provide um, training for
Mm.
individuals, and they ran a few, rounds of training for people on the African continent already. Um, and the idea is to upskill these people so that they can take on gig work. So that's the Yoma project that you can have a look at, and that is where a lot of the analysis on, how do you enable people that don't have smartphones is actually taking place as well. Um, is blockchain safe?
Yes, I mean, I touched on that a bit in my talk. The technology, yes, the technology is very safe. The problem is that it's almost, people open doors. So let me use the example of an exchange. An exchange is a marketplace that brings buyers and sellers together. So it's a bit like running a vegetable market. If you want to sell your vegetables there every single day, what you should do at night is take them back home. Anything that's not sold, you should take it back home and keep it safely at your house. What happens is that people leave their vegetables on the market. So people leave their Bitcoins on an exchange on the market, and then that market ends up getting robbed or hacked, because they have poor security around it. So the actual blockchain technology is extremely safe. But the problem is some of the players that are interacting within this space, they don't have the proper security in place to protect people's assets. And there is an option, by the way, where you can protect your own assets. You can store them on a hardware wallet, or even on a software wallet on your own computer. But the idea is that you shouldn't be leaving them with somebody else to look after, and you should never give your money to somebody else to be involved in this space. It's really about you taking control of your own assets.
Thanks, Tanya. Tanya, we have about four more questions. I think we should just go through it if you have a few minutes for us.
Okay, sure.
Okay. Understanding blockchain for supply chain. Can you give a little bit of insight into blockchain for supply chain?
Yeah, sure. So I'm not an expert in supply chain, but it speaks quite nicely into the example that I used about bringing a car into a country. It's to say, in a supply chain, you need, various components, or these various people, suppliers, who are contributing, let's say, to a manufacturing process or to goods moving through a chain. And the idea here is to have some sort of record of information that is shared amongst everybody, and then the other players in it would verify that information is correct, and you have one single source of truth where you'll be able to say, okay, this is, for example, if you're bringing the car in, this is where the car is sitting at the moment, or you want to verify where this part was made, you'd be able to verify it was part of this batch at this time where this part was made. But again, these ideas are incredible and they work very, very well in theory, but you're really looking at trying to disrupt or trying to get a whole industry to change to get something serious off the ground.
Absolutely. The next question is how to how to implement blockchain technology, example tokens, for your non-DAO startup.
How to implement blockchain technology for your non-DAO startup. Sure, you know what, Anushka, I need more context on that one.
Yeah, that is a bit vague.
Uh, it depends on what the startup would be, so it's a bit of a difficult question to answer.
All right. Yeah, I totally agree. Possible case studies for where blockchain is used in South Africa. Like, are there specific projects in South Africa that people can draw their attention to?
Yes, I think they are. So there's a few. I mean, you can always speak to the digital identity space, but as I mentioned, the South African Reserve Bank has been looking at Project 𝒂𝒂𝒂, which has used blockchain technology around the settlement, around some cross-border payments and some debentures before. There's so many. I'm hitting some blanks. I'm thinking of all the crypto exchanges. We've got lots of crypto exchanges here. I know that some of the projects that I'm working on, some of the South African banks are looking at. There's actually a very, very interesting paper that's just come out from a company called CVVC, so Crypto Valley Ventures, I think they're called. They've just written a paper in conjunction with that's been sponsored by Standard Bank that looks at the uses of blockchain technology across Africa and various applications of it. So that's probably a good place to start and see some of those.
Thanks, Tanya. And then our last question is how can we implement this technology in a country or a bank where the technology is still new?
I think that's probably the best place to implement it. Because you're starting with a greenfield approach where nothing has been done before. So it would just depend on what you're trying to do. But I know, for example, there are a lot of initiatives like organizations like the African Development Bank, where they're trying to say, how can this technology be used in Africa? And they're sponsoring a number of projects in this space. And then there's even options where central banks are running various pilots, and they've involved a number of vendors to look at some of those. So even the technology that Finality is using, a lot of local countries are saying, how can we use this sort of model in our own country at the moment? There's all sorts. And then you always got to be careful. There's all the big, well, shame, I don't know if anyone works for big consulting house, but all the big consulting houses run various projects in this space. But there's another organization called the Global Policy House, that there's a lady running a lot of stuff for African countries in this space around education and projects that people could be looking at. And she's working with the African Development Bank around a lot of those. So maybe those are some good places to start.
Oh, lovely. Well, that's all of our questions for today. Tanya, thanks so much for taking time out and doing this for us. I hope that everyone on the line got some idea as to what blockchain is, because this is the foundation of our knowledge, right? We'll see you in 2 weeks' time when we talk about now what is cryptocurrency, and we'll delve a little bit deeper into that. So thanks so much for joining us. Please keep in touch. Please get more people to join this series of webinars, because I think it's definitely going to increase the education levels in South Africa in terms of blockchain. And then when we get to that NFT workshop, I hope that many of you will be joining us. So thanks so much, and go well.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.